First things first. Yippee! Now that that's out of the way, let's get to the topic at hand. Let me ask you something. How many Pokemon games do you think will be remembered? I'm aware that there's a mountain of games you could choose from, like Platinum, the Unova Saga, heck, even Crystal. But have you looked at these games objectively? For instance, Platinum has an interesting story, but the gameplay is far from perfect. Unova might have a unique story for Pokemon standards, but the regional routes are kinda bland. I couldn't tell you the difference between Route 3, 6, or 12. And Crystal, I think, is the worst of those three. Meh story, slow gameplay, and sometimes ear-grating music. Now, granted, maybe they'll be remembered for these things. After all, some of the best things out there are flawed to the teeth. But will they be able to stand the test of time? Now, what makes a video game stand the test of time? Well, in my opinion, it's a combination of gameplay, story, and music. Now, I'm going to talk about things that are not Pokemon related. I know that goes against everything that my channel stands for, but I feel deviating from that for the sake of making my point will help in the long run. Let's try to quickly run down the list, shall we? First, let's talk about gameplay. Gameplay needs to be intuitive and easy to understand, or extremely satisfying to master. An example of each gameplay method I just mentioned can be represented by Mega Man 2 and Super Smash Bros. Melee, respectively. Let's start with Mega Man. Mega Man 2's gameplay is very simple. Jump, run, and shoot. Also climb ladders sometimes. The challenge in it comes in the stages, where type platforming is abundant and trial and error is a necessity. The most prominent example of trial and error comes in these weird disappearing block sections. You have like a second to react and it's impossible to know what's coming. All those aspects combine into a difficult challenge and a memorable experience that will stick with you for a little while. Now for a game that has hard mechanics to master, let's look at Super Smash Bros. Melee. Now, I'm not much of a fighting games player, so I'm the least reliable source of knowledge to turn to. Sure, I can hold my own as a novice, but against actual players, I'm trash. I'm fascinated by fighting games players, the way they can pull off combos, dodge maneuvers, and legit big brain strategies that make chess look like snakes and ladders in comparison. I'll probably never be able to wrap my head around it, and even though I suck at fighting games, I can appreciate the time and effort these players put into their character of choice. How does this compare to Pokemon? Pokemon's gameplay hasn't really changed over 20 years. 20 years. So it makes it easier to pick which game to example. Let's go with my completely unbiased first choice, Pokemon Ruby. I already went into the battle stuff in a separate video, but the way a Pokemon battle ensues, besides story significant ones, is by having an NPC just standing there and you walk into their line of sight, or by walking around in the grass to battle a wild Pokemon. There's really not much else you can do in Ruby, but some things you can do is do beauty contests, finish the Pokedex, try to best the battle tower, and explore every corner of the region. It's a solid formula. Pokemon wouldn't be going strong today if the formula didn't work. That and the anime probably. The only exception to the formula that has released was Sun and Moon and Yusum, because of the trials. Looks like maybe Scarlet and Violet might finally break that little glass ceiling, but I guess we'll find out next month. Next, let's talk story. A story has to be memorable, have twists that surprise, and character arcs that make sense. I'd love to talk RPG, but that'd take way too long. Instead, let's look at Kirby Superstar. Kirby Superstar is a game that has multiple stories. The two most prominent are Meta Knight's Revenge and Milky Way Wishes. Meta Knight's Revenge, or MKR, is about Kirby stopping a flying warship from taking over Dreamland. The flying warship is called the Halberd and is being commandeered by Meta Knight. Now, why is Meta Knight doing all this? He thinks the residents of Dreamland are lazy. I didn't say the story had to be meaty, just engrossing. Now, by the end, he probably still thinks that. Anyway, throughout the story, which is being told by gameplay and intercom conversations, Meta Knight holds his crew in low regard. But towards the end, he lets his proverbial mask slip and show that he is a humble and caring individual. Sure, trying to force a planet's inhabitants to exercise is a weird way of showing it, but I suppose he cares about them so much that he wants them to be in tip-top shape. Okay, fine, I'm theorizing, but my point stands. The story is engaging. It's a race against time and it's heart-pounding. Okay? We good? Good. Now let's look at Milky Way Wishes. For some reason, a dwarf yellow star and a small celestial body decide to have a territorial dispute. A small jester named Marx tells Kirby to fly around the solar system to gather energy to awaken a giant clockwork star so Kirby can make a wish to stop the sun and the moon from fighting. Once Kirby does that, he takes the energy Sonova and awakens him. But right before Kirby can make his wish... Actually, can Kirby talk? Anyway, Mark's Falcon punches Kirby away before he can make his wish, and then he wishes to take over Popstar. He then exposes that it was he who convinced the sun and moon to be petty and duke it out, so Kirby could do all the hard work for Marx to
take over the world.
Again, these are small examples, but MKR and MWW are memorable stories, mostly because they're short, simple, and to the point. Without good storytelling, how can a plot be memorable? Now let's look at an example of storytelling from Pokemon, and what better story to mention than Pokemon Black and White's. While we do have an avatar character, he or she doesn't really grow, at least aside from what the player experiences themselves. The real main character of the story is N. For those who haven't heard of N, he was, I think, abandoned in the woods and grew up surrounded by Pokemon, and he learned to understand what they were saying. He was found by a group called Team Plasma, and seeing how much N cared about Pokemon, they decided to make him their leader. I am going to be skipping some minor plot details, but I'm trying to save time here. But as Team Plasma enacted their plan, N slowly learned the true nature of Pokemon. Whereas before, he thought people just used them to further their own goals. N found that people and Pokemon worked together to make a world a better place, and that his main caretaker Getsus was using N like he thought that Pokemon were being used by people. There was a sequel, but you get the idea. Unova had amazing ideas and executed them really well. I wish it didn't sell so poorly. Maybe we would have gotten more story-focused Pokemon games. I know that Gen 7 focused on story, and I applaud it. I'm glad Gen 7 is getting the recognition it deserves after being lampooned for years. Now for the final thing I mentioned at the beginning. Music. I could have said sound, but a channel called Video Game Donkey made a video about sound, and he puts it better than I ever could. If you want to check it out,
links as always are in the description down below.
Now music can either enhance the experience or ruin it, or it's so bad that it just becomes more popular than the game, such as this. An example of the previous option is one of my favorite games of all time, Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest. Now, I could go on and on about this game and its music and how the composer David Wise expertly crafted this soundtrack, but I've rambled enough about the previous talking points. I'll let the footage and audio speak. I'd love to show you more of the soundtrack, but I'd rather you experience it yourself. The best way to currently do that is through a restoration project of the game's soundtrack. The project's goal was to revert it to the state it was before Rareware exported it to the Super Nintendo's sound chip. The channel's called Jammin' Sam Miller, and you can find it in the description down below. Now for Pokemon's music. Almost no one's disputing that Pokemon music's almost always a win. I'll let the music like DKC2 to speak for itself. I don't think I need to say anything further. Now that I've shown examples from Pokemon and a few others, will Pokemon have any longevity? I think it will. Sure, you can call it repetitive, bland, and all sorts of things, but put all these ingredients, good and bad, together, what do you get? Something unique, something that has yet to be truly replicated, a global phenomenon. Pokemon's presence is undeniable in modern culture. For it to be forgotten is nigh impossible. There's references to it in other video games, movies, TV shows.
Arceus created a universe with 3 states of matter.
Pokemon isn't my favorite franchise, and I can admit that it has numerous flaws, but not everything's perfect, even my favorite franchise. Sometimes, flaws can enhance the charm. It's not always about how good a cake looks. Sometimes, it's all about how good it tastes, despite its imperfections. And everyone has different tastes. Some might not be to your liking, but there will always be a flavor for you. Anyway, that's it for now. Like and sub or I'll reopen some fault lines.